In today's video, we're taking a look at the latest trade talk around the league, including teams like the Ottawa Senators, the St. Louis Blues, some UFA rumors on the remaining guys that are still looking for work, plus a big UFA rumor potentially for next year's class. Could William Nylander join one of the rival Canadian teams if he indeed becomes a UFA next summer? Plus, we have some other signings, including some RFAs through arbitration and settled on their own, including a couple with the Boston Bruins. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of things to take a look at today. I want to start off first with some signing news. We have a couple of deals in Boston. As we know, the Bruins and goaltender Jeremy Swayman had their arbitration hearing a couple of days ago. I talked about it on the channel recently that we suspected an announcement on the Swayman award through arbitration likely sometime this afternoon, and we did indeed get that. Plus, the Bruins were able to avoid a hearing with forward Trent Frederic. That was scheduled for today, and they settled beforehand. The Swayman contract comes in at 1 year, $3.475 million. I'm a little bit surprised, to be honest. I thought Swayman was going to get a little bit more. Not drastically. I thought he was going to get around 3.6, 3.7, given the fact that Samsonov got 3.55 and Swayman had better stats. I guess they kind of looked at the Samsonov contract and thought maybe the workload that he put out, because he did play more. I wonder if maybe the workload was just considered to be more of a factor. Obviously, the more you play, the more opportunities you have to maybe have a bad game here or there, or whatnot, which could affect your stats a little bit. The better your stats are, the more difficult and challenging they are to keep up for a longer stretch of time, I guess. So I guess they obviously consider the Samsonov body of work just a little bit better. Nothing drastic there, of course, but that's good for the Bruins. I thought it was going to be a little bit more. Like I said, 3.6, 3.7, a little closer to that $4 million mark. Swayman was looking for well above 4. But of course, they settle, somewhere near the middle of the negotiating the spots here between what the team and the player were offering. So that's good news. At least that's settled and done with. Like I said before, though, players going through the arbitration process, I do seriously concern and wonder what the future holds for the team and player. Hopefully things were not too nasty in the hearing and they can move forward with a good relationship, because it's very, very challenging to do so. A high percentage of players go through that process, don't stay with the team very long afterwards. The team also were the player elected arbitration in this case. The Bruins could have elected to sign him for 2 years. It was either 1 or 2 years in this case, because he's had multiple RFA years remaining until he's a UFA, and they chose 1 year. So I don't know what that says about the goaltending situation overall. Obviously, the contract works for the team. But curious to see how things work out in the future between both sides. We're curious to watch that. Now, the Bruins, like I said, also had another arbitration case that was scheduled to start today, and shortly before it started, they settled on their own. Once those arbitration hearings start, you cannot negotiate anymore. You can't kind of keep going and circumvent that. So Trent Frederic and the Boston Bruins avoid that. They get a 2-year deal at $2.3 million. I believe Frederic was looking for 2.9 in arbitration. The team was, I think, around 1.4, 1.5. So again, it's probably a little bit more in favor of the player than the team in this case, but not drastically. Another case of, being close to the middle between where both sides were at. So obviously Frederic had a breakout year last year, putting up 17 goals. This allows him an opportunity to hopefully continue to build upon that, and we'll see where that goes. But with these two signings, that does leave the Bruins technically cap compliant. Now, if you look at cap friendly, I'm not sure if they've adjusted the roster or not as of yet, but I know earlier today they were showing 13 forwards, 8 defensemen, and of course the 2 goalies, and they were over the cap by about $400,000. Now, there's a couple of options there. They could reduce it to 12 forwards. They could even reduce to 6 or 7 D and create a little bit of extra space to be cap compliant and have a little bit to boot. But they also have, like I said, what looks like Cap Friendly and Puckpedia have done with their salary cap situations. They're going to assume here that they're likely going to go with 12 forwards for now. And either way, they have multiple players that could either go down to minors or through waivers, or they have options. They just have to cut one player. One of those players likely makes, $750,000 to $800,000 or so. There's a couple of different options. and they could easily be compliant and be in the plus here and have about 420,000 or so of cap space to boot. Now, of course, that way they can be accruing cap space as the season goes along. That does give them, upwards of having, a pretty full roster, about 22 players. So that should work for them. They should be okay. So the Bruins are not going to be obligated to make any subsequent moves if they don't want to. But they will get a buyout window now that their RFA business is all signed, sealed, and delivered. That will begin in 48 hours time from earlier today when the Swayman announcement came. So you're looking at, with that being Tuesday, Thursday afternoon. So they'll have like Friday, Saturday, Sunday to do a buyout if they want to, because it'll last for 3 days. So I don't expect them to do a buyout. You never know. They might. But the buyout player has to be on the roster as of the previous trade deadline. So it can't be anybody they've signed or acquired this offseason. And it has to be a player making at least $4 million. If you look at the roster, there's just not a ton of players that meet that criteria. There are some, obviously, and I'm just not sure that there's really anybody that meets the criteria and kind of makes sense for them to consider doing. So I personally think it's doubtful that they'll use it, but you never know. We will wait and see. And like I said, they don't have to make any other moves to be cap compliant if they don't want to. If they do, the most likely casualties, you'll call them, could be either moving a defenseman like a Matt Grzelcyk and Derek Forbort. They don't necessarily have to do that either, but those would be one of the probably top two guys. I mean, they're not going to move McAvoy, Lindholm, or likely Carlo. That would be, you're looking at somebody who would be like a 4, 5, 6 guy would be the most likely player. So we'll see. I mean, both Forbort and Grzelcyk's names have been mentioned in the rumor mill for some time. So we'll see. But Boston's business is technically done. They don't have to make other moves, and we'll see what they decide to do here moving forward. The New York Rangers also had a RFA scheduled to go to arbitration here as well, which they were able to avoid, and that's with 23-year-old left shot defenseman Brandon Scanlon. Not a name that's going to be super familiar to everybody, but he was a player who was signed as an undrafted college free agent a couple of years ago. He's a big defenseman, 6'4", 215, left shot. Played in the American Hockey League for the past 2 seasons. He was signed into the college after the college season 2 years back. So really not that long ago. He had a shortened first season, of course, because he only played the end of the year, so he was allowed to burn a year off. He had a 2-year entry-level deal because of his age, and then played all of last season in the American Hockey League. So essentially, they've settled. He gets a 1-year contract, so he'll still be RFA after the end of the deal. He'll be $775 at the NHL level if he gets NHL games, and he'll get $100,000 at the AHL level. So I'm assuming he was likely lobbying for a bigger American Hockey League salary. Was what took things to take so long in that particular case. Don't expect him to really get NHL timed unless they run into a bunch of injuries, but certainly an interesting prospect defenseman. He's got good size for sure, so be curious to see how things work out for him moving forward. We don't have too many arbitration cases left. Of course, today's August the 1st. Right now, tomorrow, August 2nd, is the scheduled date for Troy Terry and the Anaheim Ducks, who are about $3.5 million apart, with Troy Terry looking for around $8 million and the Ducks offering $4.5 million. We know they're likely going to settle somewhere in that 6 to 6.5 range would be my guess. I don't know if they'll settle ahead of time or not. We'll see, but the hearing is scheduled to start tomorrow afternoon, so we'll see if they come to terms, or if not. I mean, with tomorrow being Wednesday, we would have a result on Friday if it does end up going the rest of the way through this process. And then on August the 4th, which would be on Friday, we have the remaining Arb cases scheduled for Ryan McLeod in the Edmonton Oilers and Drew O'Connor in the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that's the end of it. Everybody else has ended up settling on their own. So we've had 3 cases so far go through arbitration, with 3 more potential cases to go. We don't really know at this point. I would not be one bit surprised if the Ducks and Terry do go through it tomorrow, and I think the other 2 are trending that way right now as well, but we'll see. Obviously, the Ryan McLeod contract is going to possibly squeeze Evan Bouchard. The Oilers don't have a ton of space left. They have to sign McLeod and Bouchard. Bouchard doesn't have Arb rights. McLeod does. So certainly the more money McLeod gets is going to leave less money to sign Bouchard. Could lead to other moves in Edmonton, or it could put the pressure on Bouchard to sign for less than he wants. Maybe take a 1-year deal. continue to build upon that and hopefully get a longer term next year when the cap goes up and they hopefully have a little bit more breathing room. In the UFA market, still lots of interesting names. I did see one UFA rumor that suggested that the San Jose Sharks are actually looking at a couple of the remaining players that are still on the market, and that includes former Anaheim Duck Max Comtois, who was not qualified and went from being an RFA to a UFA. Apparently, they're also contemplating Tomas Tatar. Tomas Tatar is probably, in my opinion, the best player available amongst this group of players. He is apparently talking to a few teams, but there really is no suggestion that they're close on a deal. Matt Dumba still out there. Josh Bailey, who was eventually bought out and became a UFA. Pius Suter, former Red Wing. Jesse Puljujarvi. Nick Ritchie, Ethan Bear, Austin Watson, Tyler Mont, Paul Stastny, all still out there as well. I would suspect that throughout the next couple of weeks, at least a few of these guys are going to get deals, and then some of them might have to end up going to camp on a PTO. Like, I know, like the trade market that we've talked about, there's lots of rumors. There's still lots of talking. There's just not a ton of movement. And I think once some of the RFA business gets completed here, we'll probably see an increased amount of business kind of, start to pick up a little bit in that sense as we get closer to the end of August and, trading camp's not far away and all that kind of stuff. But the trade market is kind of blocked up right now. And there's, like I said, there's lots of rumors of what teams want to do. I just don't know when things are going to be executed. And some of these players are waiting for teams to free up money, and they may end up having to go with teams that have the space and not necessarily ideally where they want to go, and probably just take short-term, 1-year cheaper deals with the hope of getting traded at the deadline or go somewhere else next year. We'll have to see. But these guys are your group of UFAs that don't have a ton of options and are probably waiting for something to open up, and they can't wait forever. So it'll be interesting to see where they go. Recently signed UFA Vladimir Tarasenko finally had a chance to speak to the media in Ottawa today after signing a 1-year, $5 million contract a few days back. Obviously, they were negotiating with him since the beginning of free agency. When free agency first opened, they were one of the teams to pitch him early and offered a multi-year deal at that point. I think there's a 4-year deal on the table for Tarasenko. He chose to kind of think about it, look at other options, and ended up coming back to Ottawa on a shorter deal later, of course, but he ended up signing. There was other deals from the Hurricanes were in the mix, the Sharks, I think the Panthers to some degree as well. And clearly, Tarasenko said that one of the main things when he was making his decision is he took some time. He obviously talked to not only Pierre Dorion, but DJ Smith and the leaders of the Sens team in the dressing room, specifically mentions Brady Tkachuk and Claude Giroux, who he spoke with and was convinced that they have a great culture in a room, that guys really want to win, which is what he wants. And of course, he already said that he already knew from playing against them and watching them that they were a really up and coming team who he knew were poised to take a big step. So obviously all that kind of enticed him to sign. He said for family reasons it was worked out best to sign for 1 year, and to be honest, I think for the team it's probably best anyway. It gives each the player and the team a chance to do basically a 1-year trial to see how this is going to work out. Can he be super productive? Is he going to have a lot of fun and success and want to stay? Will the team want to keep him? All that way you're not tied to each other for a long extended amount of time without having a chance to kind of go for a test drive here first. So Tarasenko quite happy. Also mentioned he knows Artem Zub as well. He said they play some computer games together or something, but they certainly know each other from Russia, and all that's good. So obviously Pierre Dorion speaking mentioned that they felt $5 million was the most that they could offer at this point in free agency because of other things that they have to do and that they're working on. So it kind of got people talking a little bit about what those things might be. Obviously, we know one of them is signing RFA centerman Shane Pinto. We don't know what kind of deal. He may end up having to take a 1-year deal for now. I would imagine a team and player would probably prefer to go more, like at least 2 or 3 years, but at the same time, there's not a ton of space available. I mean, obviously, next year and beyond, there would be. The Sens are going to have a lot of flexibility next offseason because they do have a fair bit of players now on expiring deals, and they have a fair bit of dead money coming off their cap as well from buyouts before. Like the Bobby Ryan buyout, it will be over. They bought out Michael Del Zotto a couple of years ago. That's a small hit, but still that'll be expiring as well. And of course, the retained money on Matt Murray, all that comes off the cap. So I think with all that, they get like an extra, I think about $4 million back in available space, plus the cap's going up. $4 or $5 million, and then they've got Kubalik, Tarasenko, Brandstrom. They got a bunch of guys on 1-year deals, so they're going to have a lot of options and flexibility next year. They could probably open the offseason, depending if they re-sign anybody ahead of time, with as much as maybe $15 million, and be able to really zone in and decide who's a couple of players they want to ink long term. So we'll see. But obviously the cap situation now is concerning. Again, Sens media talking about the fact that Matthew Joseph is the most obvious trade chip, but obviously, he was brought in. I know the team relies heavily on a few of their veteran players now that they rely on, for opinions. I know he's really close with Thomas Chabot, but at the end of the day, Joseph's contract is worse on the team now. He just didn't live up to expectations last year, battled a lot of injuries, and I was a little concerned about it. I mean, I didn't mind the signing in the beginning, but to be honest, he had a chance to play top 6 minutes when he first got there in the trade for Nick Paul because of all the injuries and things that were going on with the team at the time. And he put up almost a point per game status. And in the short number of games they get to play at the end of the year, looked great, a great fit. But then last year, obviously, because of the additional depth that they brought in with like Claude Giroux and stuff, he get bumped down to the third line. So he wasn't getting as many offensive looks, wasn't playing with the same players, and battled some injuries. And he put all that together and just didn't combine for a good season. So as much as they want to move him, he's making $2.9 million for another 3 years. That's not going to be easy to do. What team's going to want to take that on from a struggling player coming off a bad season? So they may have to look at other options. Those other options appear to be possibly Erik Brandstrom, who just signed a 1-year deal, $2 million. There's still, even though he had you could call it a breakout season last year, there's still, I'm not entirely convinced. I know a lot of people aren't either, that he fits with the D-core long term. I think because he was the main trade chip in the Mark Stone trade, they're reluctant to move him now. They want to obviously see him have success and work out in Ottawa for that purpose, but at the same time, it's been a long time coming. They've added a lot to their blue line. They have young players like Tyler Clevin and Jacob Bernard-Docker ready to take spots. They obviously added Chychrun last year, so they got Zub and Chabot and Chychrun. You got these young guys. Obviously, Jake Sanderson was a huge rookie last year for them and breakout star. So they got their top 4 set. Is Brandstrom a third pair guy, or do you want more of a guy like a big punishing defenseman like Tyler Clevin back there, right? So at the end of the day, one of these guys are going to have to be moved to create some space to sign Pinto. They could also end up moving a player down through waivers, or because most of the guys that would be likely be selected would be potentially need waivers, but between moving a player down and moving out one salary would be enough to get them to be compliant and ready to roll for the start of the season. So I'm not convinced it's going to be Joseph, just because I don't know that they can move that money. It's going to be challenging to see what they can do here, but Pierre Dorion appears to be ready to work and get back at things here. The other thing I want to talk about today is the St. Louis Blues. Apparently, are still very actively trying to shake up that D-core. We know they tried to move Torrey Krug, and he's still the preferred guy that they'd like to move, but it's becoming very much impossible to do. The fact, like Doug Armstrong painted himself into this corner, though, like I said before, he's given out way too many no trade clauses and no move clauses on this blue line. They've almost all got them between Krug and Parayko and Leddy and Falk. Like, you can't move any of them without their permission. Like, to me, that was pretty dumb. Like, I think these clauses need to be reserved for higher end players, like your top guys. Like, and the fact that Krug, now I could see maybe Krug being one of those guys because he was brought in to be like a Pietrangelo replacement. They expected him to be number one defenseman, and he hasn't quite lived up to that during his time in St. Louis. And now he's got a fair bit of term and money left on his deal, and they're not so fond of it anymore. Like, things can change. You can have, buyer's remorse pretty quick sometimes. Obviously, trying to trade him earlier in the year didn't work out. He blocked that, and he's likely going to continue to do so. So right now, it looks like for them to have any chance at shaking up their blue line, they're probably going to have to move Marco Scandella. He seems to be the most logical, who's at most a third pair guy. But the problem is that they're likely going to have to pay somebody to take his contract. So they might have to give up a pick or a prospect to do so. That may not happen until training camp, when teams kind of see what they have, or maybe they run into an early injury that they're not expecting or something like that. It's not going to be easy. I honestly don't know that the Blues are really going to be a whole lot better of a team for the coming season. They made some moves, sure, but I just don't know. The blue line looks like there's lots of personal success that some of these guys have had over the years, but just together, It didn't really work the greatest last year, so be curious to see how things work out. At this point, I'll be shocked if Krug will waive for anybody, even though I know the Blues would love it if he would, and they could move on. But we'll see. Now, the Montreal Canadiens, also a team I want to touch on today. Partially, a couple of things here. One of the articles I referenced in this information comes from Arb Cases of The Athletic, kind of as a mailbag article looking at some options. And one of the things he's mentioned would be some of the names that they could be looking at for next year. And we're talking next offseason's UFA crop. Looks to be, I mean, of course, a lot of these players could re-sign, and they may not even be available, but this year's UFA crop was kind of disappointing in a sense from what was available, right? So I think we all know that there wasn't a lot of star power in that group, and next year's has potential to have tons of it, depending on who signs and who doesn't. One of the names that he mentions that could be interesting to Montreal, should he make it, this is not a rumor saying that they're going after him or they're going to trade for him, or anything like that, but should he become a UFA next summer, because right now he's scheduled to, he mentions that William Nylander might be the top 6 forward that Montreal might focus on bringing into the organization. Clearly, at this point, Montreal would struggle to have the cap room to make a big move like that, but they will be able to free up a ton of space throughout the season likely, so that they're better positioned for next year's crop of free agency. Arb Cases references the fact that they likely could move a couple of defensemen, at the very least David Savard, likely throughout the year or possibly between now and the trade deadline. Savard likely doesn't have a long future. He's got 2 years on his contract. They may not be able to. If he's having a better season this year, maybe they can move him to a contender who's going for a Stanley Cup for the remaining part of his contract. Hard to say. But he's certainly a potential guy that could go. I know, obviously, they have a lot of players that are, some have only 1 year left, so they're going to likely be gone regardless, but they're actively trying to move Mike Hoffman, who has 1 year left. Yoel Armia is another one. Sean Monahan signed for 1 year. I think the plan there is likely for him to hopefully stay healthy so that they can move him at the deadline and get assets back. I still think it's remotely possible, and I say remotely, that Monahan could have a longer future in Montreal. But given how the team has kind of emerged in some of the prospects and everything, I don't know if they'd really want to commit to Monahan for very long. I think it's more likely that, given how last year went, that he had a good start, things were looking good, then he got hurt again and it's a significant period of time. I don't think they want to take any more gambles. I honestly think we're going to have a situation where if he can have a healthier year and be available at the trade deadline, that they move him for whatever they can get, and then that's it. At the end of the time, it's up in Montreal. And they move on. Hoffman and Armia are, like I said, both players they've been trying to move for some time, and they're hoping to do that. Hoffman will be gone for sure because his contract expires. Dvorak, maybe not just yet, but he's another name that I think Montreal doesn't see a long future with, and I think they're hoping they can figure out a way to help him have a better season to create more of a trade value for him as well. So they could move out 4 or 5 forwards between now, the beginning of the season, then a couple more at the deadline to be down a fair bit of players. They have guys on 1 year contracts. Like Montreal could be in an entirely different spot next year at the free agent mark. And they'd certainly have a lot more flexibility, a lot more freed up cap space, plus the cap's going up. And they could be in a spot where they really want to add a star player to work with their young guys. Obviously, you're going to see guys like Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, continue to likely have good chemistry this year. Obviously, they have some key prospects that they're hoping to jump in and have better season, contribute more this year, like obviously Slavkovsky, a big name there as well. You got a lot of D prospects that are looking to make a jump, and looking at the forward group, they could inject themselves with another star player. They would have the room and the ability to do that. Now, Nylander may or may not be that guy. He's obviously going to be a little bit older than some of these guys, and I don't know for sure that William Nylander would even want to entertain going to Montreal. It's really difficult to say. Like I said before, I am sure Nylander's preference is to be a Maple Leaf. But again, can they really be affording to pay him what he deserves, or what he feels he deserves? Because at this point, he's still convinced he's a $10 million player or more. And if they don't get a deal done, and he goes into the season and has any kind of year like last year or better, he's just going to verify and prove again that he should be paid that much. And it's going to be tough. And teams always usually overpay a bit in free agency, and whether it be Montreal, whether it be Calgary. I can see the other Canadian teams being very interested in him should he make it to that point. next year. Even if Toronto traded him, it doesn't mean he's going to extend with the team that he goes to. So either way, there's a possibility that if he doesn't come to terms with Toronto, that he could be a UFA next year. Does he make the most sense for Montreal? I don't know. See, that's the thing with the Canadiens and free agency, is that a lot of free agents before you hit UFA status are at least 27, 28 years old. Whereas, a lot of their key players are, 22, 23 years old. They have some older players that they're trying to move out and kind of balance having some experience with the youth and kind of, on a different stage right now. But he certainly has lots of hockey left ahead of him, that's for sure. For him to sign an 8-year deal and be productive all the way through it would not be unreasonable to think. And I honestly wonder what Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes would think of that possibility. Like Kent Hughes, or in our Pod Hughes article here, he's not going out and saying Montreal's going to target him, they want him. It's nothing like that. It's just him pondering a thought, saying, looking ahead, Montreal is likely going to shed a bunch of these players between now and the trade deadline. And next year, they should be much better positioned to maybe try to add a star player to take the rebuild a big step forward. And maybe this could be the guy that they target if he's there when we get there. That's all it is. But it does make some sense. I'm not convinced it's a perfect fit, though. I'd love to know what everybody else thinks. When I seen this, I just wanted to get everybody's opinion on it. Should the Habs target Nylander if he becomes a UFA next year? Does he make sense to be the star player that they sign and try to help take to the next level? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.